Exodus chapter 1. So we see that Exodus continues on exactly where Genesis leaves off, with all the descendants of Jacob coming to Egypt. Exodus 1, 5 through 7. All those who were descendants of Jacob were 70 persons, for Joseph was in Egypt already. And Joseph died, all his brothers, and all that generation. But the children of Israel were fruitful, and increased abundantly, multiplied, and grew exceedingly mighty, and the land was filled with them. So, within the protective womb of Egypt, the Israelite family of 70 were fruitful, and increased abundantly, multiplied, and grew exceedingly mighty, for the land was filled with them. Acts 7, 17 through 18. But when the time of the promise drew near, which God had sworn to Abraham, the people grew and multiplied in Egypt, till another king arose who did not know Joseph. A population explosion took place among the Jewish people, who multiplied from 70 to multi-millions at their escape from Egypt, about 300 to 400 years. And the new king of Egypt was threatened by their numbers, fearing the people of Israel would turn on them in a time of war, and so this new king became a harsh taskmaster. Exodus 1, 9 through 12. And he said to his people, "Look, the people of the children of Israel are more and mightier than we. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, lest they multiply, and it happen in the event of war, that they join our enemies and fight against us, and so go up out of the land." Therefore they set taskmasters over them to afflict them with their burdens. And they built for Pharaoh supply cities, Pithom, and Ramses. But the more they afflicted them, the more they multiplied and grew, and they were in dread of the children of Israel. Ironically, this Pharaoh, who seeks to weaken these people, would actually serve to strengthen the people of Israel. Through his tactics, they become more robust and strong and fitted for war than the Egyptians, and therefore were formidable and a people to be guarded against. Exodus 1, 13 through 14. So the Egyptians made the children of Israel serve with rigor, and they made their lives bitter with hard bondage, in mortar, in brick, and in all manner of service in the field. All their service in which they made them serve was with rigor. So basically the Egyptians treated the Jewish people so terribly that they hated their lives. They had no rest, nor were they allowed to refresh themselves with sleep, and were most likely forced to carry dung and work in the sewers and building of sewers, and all manner of uncleanness. And not only did they put them to hard work, but also abused the Jews with their tongues and with their hands, in a merciless manner. Exodus 1, 15 through 16. Then the king of Egypt spoke to the Hebrew midwives, of whom the name of one was Shiphrah, and the name of the other Puah. And he said, "When you do the duty of a midwife for the Hebrew women, and see them on the birth stool, if it is a son, then you shall kill him, but if it is a daughter, then she shall live." Acts 7:19. This man dealt treacherously with our people and oppressed our forefathers, making them expose their babies so they might not live. But these women feared the God of Israel and refused to obey the king's command. Will you stand firm with God? And though this is not verifiable, all the facts point to these midwives being Hebrew women, especially considering that they feared God, and the two mentioned here must have been the chief midwives, who would have instructed all the other midwives of their duties, along with many other administrative duties. Obviously, had this Pharaoh the ability to look into these women's wombs and determine which ones would give birth to male babies, and they had the ability to abort them, they most certainly would have done so. Regardless, this was a heinous act of a purely evil man, who will one day sit before the judgment seat of Christ, and will receive his punishment, just as all of humanity who has partaken of such heinous crimes, of harming such innocents. Exodus 1, 17 through 20. But the midwives feared God, and did not do as the king of Egypt commanded them, but saved the male children alive. So the king of Egypt called for the midwives and said to them, "Why have you done this thing, and saved the male children alive?" And the midwives said to Pharaoh, "Because the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women, for they are lively, and give birth before the midwives come to them." Therefore God dealt well with the midwives, and the people multiplied and grew very mighty. Proverbs 16:6. In mercy and truth atonement is provided for iniquity, and by the fear of the Lord one departs from evil. So just as it was acceptable for Jesus to heal the sick and the lame on the Sabbath day, so too was it acceptable for these women to speak half-truths to the king of Egypt, for the sake of saving lives, and for fear of their true king, the one true living God of Israel. Exodus 1, 20 through 21. Therefore God dealt well with the midwives, and the people multiplied and grew very mighty. And so it was, because the midwives feared God, that he provided households for them. Now whether they were awarded their own children, or just their own homes, or families, households to care for, is unclear. Nonetheless, they were rewarded handsomely for their faith in their God. Exodus 1:22. So Pharaoh commanded all his people, saying, "Every son who is born you shall cast him into the river, and every daughter you shall save alive." And this too would serve to backfire on the Egyptians, as there would be many daughters who would eventually serve to multiply the number of Jews in the land of Egypt much more. Excuse me. So first, the Pharaoh sought to cut off the male children by ordering the midwives to kill them the moment they were born. When that failed, he then gave a general order to just take the male babies and cast them into the river. Now here in chapter 1, we see the birth of the nation of Israel within a place where God could protect them and multiply them rapidly. The very nation whom he promised the land of Israel to by his promise to Abraham. This begins Israel being brought into the world, and then God separating them from the world as his chosen people, whom he would bring salvation into this world through Jesus Christ our Lord. And this would hint at a theme of redemption, because redemption is only accomplished through Christ's death. The book of departure, Israel is born into the world, then Israel dies to the world, comes out of the world, departs from the world. Israel is born into a world that hates them. God's favor upon the nation of Israel could easily be looked at by some as a curse, because all others are jealous of that favor God has shown to Israel. Like the teacher's pet in school, all the students are jealous of that special favor shown by the taskmaster, and therefore are bitter and hard-hearted toward the favorable one. No other people could remain a nation like the people who God chose as his special people. God has made the beginning from the end, and the end from the beginning, and is in control of all that is, was, and is to be. Think about it. Would you insist on being a Jew if everyone hated you and searched you out to kill you where you sleep? Would you insist on keeping your bloodline purely Jewish blood, knowing everyone wants you dead? The world wants us to compromise and become intermingled with them, becoming something unnatural of this world and not of God. But God's people insist time and time again against all men and against all odds. They insist on being their own pure nation of Jewish people who love their traditions and who serve their God loyally and boldly, and they will not be bullied by any people. They know who their God is. But still, the majority deals with Israel shrewdly and rigorously, with hardened hearts as Pharaoh had toward them. And even with all the power and influence the Pharaoh had, he could not stop God's chosen people from multiplying and becoming very mighty. A reminder that our God is always greater than the problem at hand. Not even the gates of hell or Hades will prevail against one of his children. A house divided amongst itself cannot stand, and all of the enemy's household is divided against itself. It will not stand. The officers could not seize Jesus in Jerusalem after being ordered by the Pharisees during the feast, because the darkness has no power over the light. The darkness cannot contain the light. The light prevails every time. They were hypnotized. They themselves were seized and mesmerized.